at any time during the broadcast using the chat window located in the control panel. Chat questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Today's session is being recorded, and you'll be provided a copy of today's materials following the call. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Vincent Bradley is the founder, president, and CEO of WTG. In 1993, he entered the telecommunications industry as a sales representative for AdTel Communications and was instrumental in establishing the sales division, which grew from 3 representatives with annual revenues of $1 million to a respectable-sized reseller with revenues in excess of $10 million in just 1 year. In 1996, he founded WTG and has grown the company into one of the largest master agencies in the United States. Vincent has been voted to top 10 and top 25 IT executive lists the last 3 years in a row by CRN Magazine, has served or is currently serving on advisory boards for Channel Partner Magazine, CRN's Exchange Conference, and over 20 providers. Vincent is also a council member of the Gershon-Lerman Group and a founding member of the Board of Directors for Technology Channel Association, the first and only nonprofit association for the agent channel. Vince, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Sam. Really appreciate all the members of CSC, Cloud Services Community, and members for joining today. As you mentioned, WTG has been working with solution providers for a long time now, in fact, over a decade, and on a high level for over 5 years now, going to a lot of the exchange shows. We were the first master agent to enter the space. So we've helped hundreds of solution providers over the years build cloud practices. And since we are a master agent, but we heavily focus on solution provider relationships, we actually coined ourselves a connectivity services distributor a couple of years ago. And the main reason for that is so they can understand better what we do. Connectivity being the main product, services being the form of delivery, and of course the distributor is who we are. So let's go ahead and get into the content here. And the first thing we'll discuss is going to be the benefits to having a cloud sales team. So when you look at the benefits, I mean, certainly adding a new revenue stream is probably one of the main reasons why solution providers would add a team. I think some of the things that are not as well known is the fact that it's going to enable you to do more of your core business. It's actually going to help you grow what you're already doing by virtue of bundling the products and services. In addition to that, you can retain many more customers as well. So we talk about the total ownership of the customer relationship. And so, right now you've got your core products, but, we've heard from so many solution providers over the years, you get the call for the network services, you can't fix it, and you end up working on it with no pay and no control. And by adding services, not only can you control the process, you can also get paid to do so. So that total commitment really, really wins in the end. And then another thing we like to talk about is the benefits. In the benefits category would be the tremendous resources that are available to you. And I think this is really, really unknown. More than in hardware and software, there are abundant human and system resources available to you. If direct, then you really need to work it. You need to dig in and find out what those resources are if you have a direct contract with a carrier. So it's a little bit tougher, but if you work through a distributor or a master agent, then you can help with quickly getting to those resources. And in addition, distributors and master agents can help you with those solutions. So a couple different ways to go there, but when it comes to resources, they're definitely there for you. When we look at the power of the recurring revenue and the annuity model, if you consider the fact that you already get the upfront compensation on your core products, but in tough times, example 2009, those upfront compensation sources can dry up, as a lot of us saw. And so adding recurring revenue can really help during those slow periods because the residual keeps coming in long after the sales do. for years, in fact. And so it's been a very nice way to dynamically allocate your compensation. And finally, we look at the loss of businesses without a service practice. More and more, we are seeing solution providers lose business to competitors that they usually win against. And a lot of them have even talked to us about this. And the main reason is because they don't have a sales practice, a services practice. And the solution there is to get one. And so, with that, we'll take it to the next slide and talk a little bit more about it. Let's look at the pitfalls of implementation. So I think the key here is to make that decision. And in making that decision in which way you'll go, there's several options. You can have direct contracts with the cloud providers. You can go through a master agent. You can go through a distributor. And even other solution providers is another option as well. So that decision is so important before you start. So again, it's making that decision, and then with starting, it may not seem like a pitfall. It may seem simple, but it really does take planned action, and it's not just a business plan or a loose project module. In fact, it's really more about the business planning discussions, and that we have with everyone. And I think that the challenge here is that I can't tell you how many times we have had great business planning discussions with solution providers for them only to get back to the office and find that they've got, a couple of new projects, which is great. They're building business and they have more stuff ahead of them, but it makes it very tough to actually start the process of adding a cloud services practice. So really pushing through that natural issue that comes up for all of us and starting is the key. So you decided, you started, and then it's an adjustment. Really at that point, training your existing team to hiring new, or adding outside sales to inside sales, adding new products, and then going to market. I think that a lot of people, tend to jump into the field before they're really ready. And so it's a very key point there. When you talk about risk and reward, the question, can you afford to lose business to your clients? And, of course, the answer is going to be no. And I think that fear has been a real common objection when you look at this. Can I afford to sell? Can I afford to sacrifice the sale of the box or the software? Fear is really no longer a valid objection. So don't let it be a pitfall for you. Take control of your customer relationships by adding a cloud practice. The willingness to support the entire relationship with the client really comes down to that. The question of, are you going to add, or are you going to have a lack of control? So that really is the question for you today. Finally, we look at hiring. And this one is so key to take the time on deciding. It's a big pitfall, as many will just try to train people who already have a full workload. And that ends up failing most of the time. It's very hard to scale in a growing business with employees that are already tapped out. So the bottom line is, looking at dedicated human resources, people that are just doing the services practice, is very key. And not only in getting things going, but also in the success of the cloud practice. So try to avoid these pitfalls that many people get pulled into. Next thing we want to look at is, should you teach your current sales team to sell cloud services, or should you hire new people? This is a great question, and it requires much thought and much, business planning as well. The first thing to mention here would be that it really depends on what type of services you're going to be focused on. For example, for a phone systems dealer, they need SIP trunking to do what they're already doing. And as a result of that, they really don't need to hire people to make that happen. On the other side of the coin, infrastructure as a service, in other words, data center services, managed services, etc. For an enterprise customer, for example, you would really need to hire someone for that because it's a very specialized area. Whatever you do, give them a quota for services. So if you've got sales reps, channel managers, etc., that you're going to bring into your services practice, make sure and give them a quota And the reason for that is they will not sell as much or at all if they don't have that comfort level. It's much easier for them to continue doing what they're doing. This is one of the biggest points to make here, is to have a quota, because we've seen a lot of solution providers that didn't have a quota for services and they didn't succeed. If you have subject matter experts in telecom and cloud services, then you can certainly tap those for that existing headcount. And I think the key here is, just make sure that they're not a SME from back before 2000, because ultimately things have changed so much since that time. People that were in the industry, more than 10 years ago, for example, the cloud proliferation has really changed the landscape today in the services space. So, the bottom line here, if your team has the time to train, then train, train, and train again, and you can scale them into a cloud practice. If you can scale them, train them. If you can't scale them, then you should hire them. Finally, we look at resources to find this talent. You may be asking, where can I find these people if I'm interested in looking to go ahead and hire some folks? Coming from the solution provider space, you'd probably be looking at someone from the telco space, and some of the most popular areas to find those folks would be the Channel Partners Conference and Expo by Virgo Publishing, the Telecom Association, CompTIA, the Technology Channel Association, CRN, and of course the Cloud Services Community. Many of these organizations have job boards, and others are adding them, so tap them. They've got some excellent resources for you. Now we're looking at, would you start by hiring an inside or an outside salesperson? Another great question. When hiring, it's very important to weigh the pros and cons of inside versus outside sales. This will be one of the most important decisions that you'll make in this process, because it is the foundation to your success. Next, we look at the different types of compensation out there. Inside salespeople can come in, under $100,000. You could have, say, a $50,000 base and a variable compensation of, say, $10,000 to $40,000. Outside sales, however, can vary and can range from, say, $100,000 to $200,000 for the real talent. Channel managers, base may be $75,000 to $100,000. A director could be $100,000 to $150,000, and then a VP could be $125,000 to $200,000. And the variable comp on all of those positions can be about 25 to 50% of the base. So that should help you a little bit in understanding what you're getting into and some of the metrics on the finance side. Inside reps are definitely easier to train and manage. It's a good place to start because it's more controlled, measurable, and it's also much easier to depart from that relationship if things don't work out. Inside reps will certainly not be able to drive sales as well as outside representatives can. This one is kind of a double-edged sword, because while the outside rep is going to drive a lot more, you're going to have less control of them. They're going to probably take your vision a little bit less, and it's going to be harder to depart, as they may have key relationships with your customers. So how do you keep them loyal? A great way to do so is to have a residual compensation that ends with the termination of the employee's employment. So that's another key point to think about as well. And then finally, many of the inside reps will not be able to scale to the outside. They may have fear of speaking, confrontation, etc. So a very important point is to make sure that if you plan on promoting inside reps to outside, that you have the conversation with them about that up front. How do they feel about outside sales? Are they willing to scale? And do they have any issues with going in the field and traveling? So these are all very important points to look at when you consider hiring inside or outside. Finally, we get to how do you compensate and motivate the team with a recurring revenue model. And on this one, it really comes down to confirming the upfront component to keep that comfort level. Again, they're used to getting those upfront commissions, so important to give them the comfort level at first. Explain to them that they will have to wait a few months to see even the spiffs that are out there in the services space. And it could be a couple more months before they see the residual incomes coming in consistently. And if you're not going to pay residual, which is not recommended, by the way, because, again, we'll talk more about the finance, but you'll see in the end that the residual can be more powerful, then we strongly recommend that you beef up the upfront commission a lot. Ultimately, that is going to help the process and keep the motivation there. So there's several ways that, some of the service providers can compensate spiffs. Some providers actually provide a portion or all of the compensation up front. And so there's several different models out there for you to choose from. When we look at the residual and the annuity piece, it is very important to understand the rule of 78. We will review this on the next slide, but it is the most powerful method of compensation in any industry. It's also the hardest to get reps to understand. For that reason, we strongly recommend that the rule of 78 is a conversation for you and the management of your company, as opposed to the sales reps that will be working for you. And I'll show you why here on the next slide. We recommend using a visual, a very simple visual example of the rule as opposed to the rule of 78. So by doing that first, then you can get into the rule of 78 once they get, the key simple model down. It's important for you, again, though, to understand 78. And then we'll also look at some different models coming up in the next few slides here, and levels of involvement. There's so much flexibility today, so we want to spend some time on that point. We talked about the rule of 78 and the power of recurring revenue. It's an abstract concept, and this is a visual of that concept. In a nutshell, the concept says that if you sell X per month, every month, after 1 year, you will receive 78 times X. The rule is a good way to show the power of the recurring revenue model. It is also very useful when modeling projections and forecasts of the ROI potential from a services practice. It's excellent for the business planning phase, so a must for your comprehension and potentially for advanced sales reps. As you can see here, again, with an example of 10 being X, with 10 being sold each month for 12 months, at the end of 12 months, you compounded, $120 there in that column all the way to the right in the total. And as you go down the screen there, and you add all those numbers up, it comes out to 780, which of course is 78 times 10. Once again, it's one that you might want to look at again sometime, and if you're not totally clear on it, it is a good one to understand for the forecasting and modeling. The more simple message that I had alluded to before is illustrated here, and the question, what is the revenue potential for VARs selling telecom services? And so, a sample message that's real simple. And this is what you can use with your sales reps to help them understand the power of residual income. For example, in this visual, it talks about, could you use an extra $10,000 a month in a year from now, or $20,000 a month in 2 years? And so the example uses a $5,000 5K per month in telecom. And with $5K per month in telecom in sales, at a 15% commission, which is fairly typical in the industry, you see a compounding commission growing month by month. In the 13th month, this is right around $10,000. And then, of course, in the 25th month, it would also be close to $20,000. So the bottom line is that there's a very simple example. is going to work a lot better with some of the sales reps out there. And this is also a scalable model as well. If you give them a quota of, say, $2,500 per month, you can cut this in half. If it's $10,000 per month, you could double it. Most companies that are successful pay at least 20% of their gross profit to their reps. We have seen that number rise to 50% when the reps have a lower base. And again, as I alluded to before, can't emphasize how important it is to pay part of that residual income now that you've seen the power with the rule of 78 and this slide, which shows the compounding residual. You can see why, and they will too. Next, let's talk about determining the best path in establishing a cloud sales practice. There are really now so many paths paved for you. So what we'll do is we will look at 4 different models based on the level of involvement that is possible for each VAR or solution provider. In most cases, the solution provider rep is going to be teamed. So, getting back to this first bullet really quickly, it's designed to offer a range of compensation delivery methods to the VAR partner. Key is the level of involvement. It's all about how involved they are in that sales process. And then again, the teaming. In most cases, the solution provider rep will be teamed. They'll be teamed with a trusted subject matter expert that can assist them with the responsibilities that are assigned to them per the level of service listed. A subject matter expert could be an agent, could be an in-house rep, could be a provider, a master agent, or distributor. So there's several different possibilities there with that teaming. And then finally, we will look at some different models that are non-exclusive for the life of the contract. In other words, they can scale. So you can go from one level to the other in most programs. And again, not exclusive for the life of the contract. The solution provider will generally scale with the program as they become more familiar with connectivity providers, and hence have the ability to take care of the entire process on their own. The first model is one that you're probably all familiar with, and that would be a referral. So this would be an alternative to having a cloud sales team. In other words, this would be something where the visual aid you see there on the screen, they're just typing into the CRM would be a common scenario. All you're doing is entering a lead, and then someone else is picking it up and closing it for you. A real common phrase that I've used in the past has been, once you pass that referral into the system, it's, I don't do cloud services, but I know a great shop that does, and we'll have them contact you. So ultimately, what happens there is the conversation shifts over to the teaming entity, and the phone calls go to the teaming entity. In this scenario, the VAR does not want to sign up as an agent, but wants to do a referral to the teaming partner. And the teaming partner would be paid based on the published commissions of whatever provider or whoever they're going through. The typical gross profit split here would be about 30 to 40% for the VAR and about 60 to 70% for the teaming partner. Again, all you're doing is throwing a lead over the fence and adding a new revenue stream. This is nice. This model has matured a lot in that it used to be, what a lot of you have probably done as well is exchange leads with another party. We don't recommend that, and the reason for it is because inevitably one party always ends up giving more than the other party. So I think a lot of people are probably smiling when they hear that because it's such the truth. What's nice about a lot of programs today is that they're all automated where, you're being paid and the teaming partner is being paid by the entity that you're both related to. So services practice with limited engagement. So let's just say you want some on-the-job training. A VAR that signs as a VAR partner and relies on the teaming partner to perform a majority of the sales and support processes. In other words, what you really need to be doing there is, bring a very warm or hot intro to a customer, maybe via a conference call, a very persuasive communication with good recommendations. So in this case, the teaming partner would lead in the conference call. Now, of course, the solution provider could be on the phone and learning, that on-the-job training I alluded to. Other things like bill review, customer service, quoting, paperwork, and additional needs, could be that are not listed, would be no problem. I mean, really what it is that the VAR is going to be learning from the teaming partner, going to be learning the business essentially. Typical gross profit splits here would be about 60% to the VAR and about 40% to the teaming partner. So a big shift here. By just being involved a little bit, the result is so great by having, the solution provider involved in the sales process. The sales close a lot more often, and so it's a big shift in the compensation, with the majority now going to the VAR as opposed to the teaming partner. Service practices with heavy engagement. This would be a solution provider that signs up, but also would be assigned to a teaming partner. Only in this case, it would be only to advise or assist, kind of like a conciliator in terms of the sales and support process. The role here could include provider recommendations, if the VAR is not sure which way to go, joining conference calls, and an advisory role, sitting back and listening and chiming in when necessary, assisting with the quote process but not necessarily running it, and then finally provisioning escalation, which can be very key, and then other minor front-end assistance. In this scenario, it's the vast majority of the gross profit going to the solution provider, maybe 80%, where probably 20% would go to the teaming partner on average in this scenario. Service practices that are fully engaged. This would be very similar to our agent partners that are out there, and they do everything. So in other words, they're a full agent or VAR partner. They want to do all of the sales and support work with no additional help from the teaming partner. The compensation would then probably fall under one of the traditional programs of the entity they're working with. There's no teaming here, and so it's 100% of the commission. Again, as a reminder, typically there are many programs out there that allow you to scale through these levels. And most common what happens is people will sign up on either, say, a referral program or a limited engagement program and scale up to heavy or full engagement. However, we have seen companies who have, been downscaling, like in 2009, as I alluded to earlier, have actually been fully engaged or heavy engaged and moved down. And what we've been able to do is counsel them on how to do that effectively. So again, the scalability of a program is the key. Next, let's move on and talk a little bit about how to expand the cloud sales team. And so in looking at this question, the first thing to look at would be, when you expand it, how do you adjust it? And that's a question that we've spoken with a lot on over the years. Most will start with an inside rep, and that's understood. As stated before, though, you really need to go outside and have outside reps to have true success. It's tough to scale and grow services to a significant level unless you actually have representatives in the field. This also means looking at director and or VP level folks to manage them. So keep that in mind. You're going to have, once you've got enough of a critical mass of representatives, you will then need someone to manage them, and that's an important factor. So also kind of a pitfall out there that we've seen is that people hire these sales reps and they don't hire someone to manage them, and inevitably they don't have the success that they probably could have had they really truly thought the business plan through. So look at the big picture on that one. In addition, most start with simple products. I mentioned SIP earlier, and it's just absolutely necessity for everyone to kind of consider the complex products as well, the WAN, infrastructure as a service, etc. So we talked about that earlier example of SIP, but again, you're not going to scale. if you're just doing SIP. It's something that you need to do what you're doing anyway, so you're really not, truly investing in that practice if you're not scaling outside of the simple products. I strongly recommend, the need to get into the entire network, MPLS. So, look at their WAN, look at their, wide area network, look at the different technologies that they have today, where are they going. But it's not just the WAN, it's also, where is that WAN connected? It's connected somewhere, and typically it's connected back to a data center. And that's where infrastructure as a service can come in. So look at the big picture and get all of the business that comes your way. One good example of this would be, of this issue and the need to adjust, is that a lot of people will go in, and I use an example of Sprint. In the past we've had situations where, we've talked about mobility practices and stuff like that. And so there's been cases we've seen with solution providers where, they didn't have mobility. And so the Sprint rep ends up just going in and saying, oh, okay, did you know you can connect your WAN, your MPLS network, to, your wireless network and all your devices, tablets, et cetera, without touching the public internet? And the CTO is smiling and saying, oh, I did not know that. And so again, the bottom line here is to look at all those products and services, make sure you understand them so that you're capable to go to market and win. And finally, we look at dynamic networking. So, when you're working with agents, that's one way to do it. But also, other VARs that don't do what you do. I know a lot of people are probably wondering about that. It's a little bit awkward to be working with other VARs to do stuff because it's a little bit intimidating. Maybe they'll eventually add the services that you have, et cetera. I think that's where the organization that you may be working with to establish the cloud team can help you with those things. And it's really looking at other organizations that, don't do what you do and that also allow you to scale your practice. So when we talk about this, again, what about SPs that don't compete with you? Keep that in mind. We've seen huge wins with hardware solution providers working with software solution providers and vice versa. So that really is the key there. You've got to have that dynamic networking. And that really is the key, in my opinion, to expanding your cloud sales team as well. You've got to look at the whole picture as opposed to just adding more reps. So that does conclude my presentation on how to effectively build and incentivize a cloud team. Before opening up for questions, I did want to invite anyone to reach out to me if you'd like to discuss this content or anything related to it. I'm a big fan of the channel, the convergence of telecom and IT, and feel that we are just beginning on this road, especially with cloud proliferation and big data upon us. My contact information is at the bottom of the slide, and so feel free to reach out to me. And once again, thanks to everyone for joining us today. Now let's open it up for questions, and I will hand it back to Sam for that purpose at this time. Sam?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Vince. That was excellent. Yep, we will be now opening up for questions. If you would like to ask a question, we have a couple different ways to do that. One way is you can raise your hand using the Raise Hand button located in the GoToWebinar control panel. And if at any time your question has already been answered, please lower your hand or move yourself from the waiting list. And also, if you prefer, you can also ask a question via chat or the question box, also both located in the lower right-hand corners of your screen. And it looks like we already had one come in. Vince, what are your thoughts about commissions-only compensation?
Commission-only compensation, great question. And in fact, it's one that I've been reading a lot about. Recently I read an article yesterday that was talking about employee sharing. And as a result of that, this is becoming a much more increasingly popular area. When it comes to commission-only, the key is going to be loyalty. It's the biggest factor that you're going to have to consider when you bring people on with commission only. Again, if they're not a W-2 for you, there is a thing called a 1099 W-2, but ultimately it's not really something that's in your control. So the key here, in my opinion, would be always be looking to put them in a box in terms of what they're doing and the scope of their work. And again, it can be very tricky as well, because if you've got them doing any administrative tasks, the thing to avoid would be any admin, doing the same thing every day. So it's really more about having folks, as I alluded to on one of the previous slides, where I talked about, bringing in different relationships. So this would be a scenario, the 100% compensation scenario would be one where you'd maybe reach out to another VAR who doesn't do what you do. As far as bringing on reps at 100% commission, you just need to be careful, I think, of HR issues would be the number one answer I would give to that.
Excellent. Another question here. How do you measure your cloud sales team's success? What do you measure aside from revenue?
That's another great question, and I think that customer satisfaction is going to be probably the number one in this arena. For example, for those of you that are not currently measuring the satisfaction of your clients, this is something you probably want to start doing, especially if you're looking at adding a cloud sales practice. Ultimately, it's a very good point. Increased revenue is one thing, but it's not going to help you much if by adding cloud services practice you end up sacrificing in other areas. So I think that customer satisfaction is a key there, and that also goes back to what we talked about with relation to making sure that you're scaling the team and not creating a team from what you already have, especially if the members of the team that you're looking at are already very busy. They're not going to be able to scale, and you might have some issues there. So customer satisfaction would be one thing that you could measure. I think also retention is another huge one related to customer satisfaction, but not directly. So how long are you keeping your customers? Once you've got them, is services helping you increase that retention? So I think those are probably the two big ones, customer satisfaction and retention.
Excellent. How do you address churn as it relates to compensation?
Another good question. So this is a very tough one. We've seen a lot struggle with this, and it has a lot to do with the fact that you're dealing with something so far after it happened, especially when you're looking at the annuity practices, because it could be a year later. You may have compensated. Oh, let me back up for a second. So if you've elected to compensate a rep based on the contract value, which could be 2 or 3 years, and paying them all up front, then you have a big exposure on this one. Because if that customer leaves after 1 year and you've already paid the rep for 3 years, then obviously you've overpaid for that. This is, again, another reason that I strongly recommend the recurring revenue and annuity strategy, because you're paying based upon what has actually, the revenues that occur when they occur. Sure, there could be a spiff, and there could be a piece of the compensation up front, but really the big lion's share of the compensation per the rule of 78 is going to happen over the years to come. So the bottom line here is that strongly recommending that you just pay them based on those residuals as you get them as opposed to upfront. If you choose to pay your reps up front, then the most common practice we've seen is maybe only to pay for 1 year as opposed to maybe 2 or 3. So you're not really paying on contract value, you're paying on maybe a 1-year period of time. One other thing we've seen on that one has been a holdback for churn. What some organizations will do is pay 95% of the compensation. It really depends, though, on the company and the types of services being sold. If you're selling SIP on month-to-month contracts, again, it probably will be sticky. but you never know. If you're, on the other hand, if you're selling, dark fiber services on a 10-year contract, that's probably not going to go away. So there's a lot of variables there, but again, the key being, the residual being king when it comes to churn, and potentially paying 95% of the commission, and then having a 5% bucket for things when they do churn.
Excellent. That actually answers one other question that came up in that period. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask. We'll give a few moments here to see if any other ones trickle in. At this point, we've got through all of them. Oh, here's another one. What about add-on sales? Do you pay on those?
Yes, add-on sales is another real tough one in the industry. So these are great questions, these last couple especially. With add-on services, you kind of need to pay on them. Otherwise, again, you're not going to see that best practice of maintaining the customer, because you have to ask that question to yourself. Are you in this to get the customer acquisition, to go to market with the services in addition to your core services and products, or are you looking to upsell this to your existing customer base? So you need to look at the strategy you're going to market with before you can really address this question fully. But the basic answer is, if you're just looking to get those customers to come on board with services, then maybe not paying on add-ons. And again, it also depends on how you're paying. If you're paying, the nice thing, once again, I keep going back to it's like a broken record, is that residual is going to automatically cover the add-on sales. Now, there are some providers out there, typically the bigger the provider, the more common, that don't necessarily pay on add-on sales because they've already paid you in the beginning of the relationship. Once again, residual is king simply because most providers, when you add services, it's automatically going to increase the billing, and then the commission is going to go up as well as a result. So it happens just by default. So again, another reason to focus on the recurring side when you're compensating folks. So the answer is yes. I mean, typically compensating on add-on sales is a best practice. And again, if you really want your representatives to be focused on the customers and trying to build those relationships and trying to build the revenue for the company, then you definitely need to consider paying on add-on services.
Excellent. I'll another few moments here to see if any other questions trickle in. We didn't have any new ones between that one and here.
Don't be shy, folks. If you have a question, I'm sure someone else does too. So I have the same question.
Well, that appears to be it for the time being, at least. But as Vince mentioned, he does have his information on this slide. We will be sending out these slides along with a link to the recording to everyone that's on here, so you will be able to get a hold of Vince directly if anything else pops up after the fact. So at this point, I'd like to thank you again, Vince, for your presentation. That was wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciated it.
Definitely. All right, everyone, this concludes the broadcast. Thank you for attending. Please do take a few moments to fill out your post-event survey. We like everyone's input on all these events and use them to shape any future broadcasts that we create. But this concludes today's conference, and you may now disconnect.
Thanks, everyone.